asked by your children which one is your favorite, you should always pick one of them. Don't pick somebody else's children. They get mad about that. You know, when I was growing up, my sister and me used to argue about that all the time. Who was the favorite? My sister would take him to the store. She'd do something, and I'd be like, oh, that's because she's the favorite. I'd get to go somewhere, and my sister would complain, oh, that's because he's the favorite. Even as we got older, we were still arguing about that until both of us got married, and then we realized that our new in-laws were, our daughter-in-law and son-in-law were now the favorite, and we were battling for third and fourth. And after the grandchildren, now we just battle for last place. You know, which one is not the least favorite? I don't know if it was that way in every household, but it always seems like there's a sibling rivalry. Everybody tries to find their place. Most parents will try to tell their children, I don't have favorites, right? But everybody has a little bit to a degree. Maybe it's the ones you share the most commonality with. Maybe it's the one who gives you the least amount of trouble. Maybe it's the one that gives you the most amount of trouble. Who knows? But when we look at the history, the life of Israel, Israel had 12 sons. If you know the story, Israel's 12 sons came about from 2 different wives and 2 different handmaidens. He had 6 sons that were born of Leah. She was the first wife, but the wife that he didn't actually want. He wanted Rachel. He got stuck with Leah. But she was the one who was the... Then Rachel, who was having a hard time conceiving, came up with a gimmick. She would give her servant, Bilhah, as a substitute wife, and that way she could claim, as part of her house, or part of her legacy, those children. And so that servant would give Joseph 2 children. Of course, Leah would do the same thing in kind of an arms race to see who could give him the most children. She also gave her servant Zilpah, who had 2 children. It wasn't until the very end that Rachel actually had a child for her husband. Jacob's son Joseph was born. And of course, that child meant a lot to him. 1, because he had him at a later age, and 2, it was by his favorite wife. Eventually, she would have another son, Benjamin, one that she would die giving in childbirth. Now, you could see how that situation would lend to some difficulty among the sons. And in Genesis chapter 37, in verse 2, we begin to see how these favorites started to play out. It tells us these are the records of was pasturing the flock with his brothers, and he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bildiah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wife. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to his father. You see, here it tells us this is the record. And this isn't a genealogical record, but it's of Joseph coming back to his father to deliver a bad report on his brothers. We see here that Joseph was with those other sons, but there seems to be in Joseph maybe a special connection to his father. At least enough that he's not afraid to get a young punk, right? Tells us here when he was just 17 years of age. 17 years is a good age for, making some bad decisions. And here he decides that he's going to show up his brothers. He's going to report back to his father on what they've been doing. Now, they may have been completely in the wrong. They may have needed to be called to task. But somehow by Joseph doing it, this incident is recorded for us because it's setting up a narrative that continues in the next verse. Let's look at verses 3 through 4. It says, Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age. Let's stop right there. There's the problem, right? Firstborn. It wasn't the sons who had been with him the longest, but it was Joseph, because he had Joseph in his old age. Now we can also assume here that because Joseph was Rachel's child, there was even an extra significance. But for Jacob, Israel, when he looked at Joseph, he he have, like as we had a family in Lawton, and they had 7 kids. And the older ones always would get upset with the youngest one. The youngest one was still in my youth group when I was there, and she was, coming through. Well, she was the only one that was at home by the time she got to high school. And her older siblings were often married, but they would always complain of mellow out. And maybe that's the case there. But with Joseph, it was something special. He treated Joseph differently. Look at the last part of that verse. It says he made him a varicolored tunic, the coat of many colors, as it's also described. It's interesting because the term that's used here is only used another couple of times in the text besides this account. And it usually is referencing something that is worn as a decorative, almost a thing that was given to nobility. It's described of some of the daughters of David. It would be something like we would akin to like formal wear. The word literally is translated a long sleeve garment, a long full length robe. In other words, it wasn't something that you would wear to work in the fields. Okay? It was probably more ornamental, the multicolored aspect of it that the translators have chosen. It comes from that idea of, in that day and age when people, do to wear and go work, it would be, like I said, it would be something that would set you apart. And Joseph gets this. And it's interesting in the text that it puts it after this incident. Naturally you would start with that line of, well, Joseph was favored, and then you tell about the time he gave the bad report. Almost there's, well, Joseph's getting special treatment. He's getting the coat of many colors. He's being shown as the favorite. Well, in doing this, he's not really doing his son any more favors. In verse 4, the brothers saw their father loved him more than all of his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. They're mad at Joseph, but they're not really mad at Joseph. They're mad at Jacob. They're mad at Israel. They're mad at their father because look what he does for this child. Look what he does for us. But of course, they're seeking their father's approval, so they push out their anger and their hate on Joseph. They can't even talk to him. They can't even say anything nice to him. There's no peace. Well, you can imagine how that dynamic would work. Joseph is already the youngest. He's already been shown certain privileges. He's already kind of elevated himself by being the one that would grow. Well, it keeps building. In chapter 37, verse 5, we read, "Then Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even the more. He said to them, 'Please listen to the dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect, and behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf.' And his brother said to him, 'Are you really going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule over us?' So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words." Notice it starts off when he tells them about this dream, they hated him even more. He already gets the best clothes. It already seems like he doesn't have to work as hard as the other brothers do. And now he comes and tells them, "Well, God is speaking to me. I've had this vision. I've had this dream. And in this dream, well, what I see is you guys bowing down to me. Your representations are to make peace." Joseph's brothers, they hated him before, but now they really hate him. Now it's not just they're mad at their father, but they're also mad at him because who is this young punk who thinks he's going to be the one who's ruling over all of them? Let's continue reading. In verse 9, he had another dream and related it to his brothers. He said, "Lo, I had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." He related it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you've had? Shall I, your mother, and your brothers actually come and bow ourselves down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept these sayings in mind. Now he comes again and he says, "Well, I've had another dream. In this dream, it's even bigger. Before, it was just my brothers represented by sheaves. That's just kind of working kind of things. But now the sun and the moon and the stars are bowing down before me. Now it's not just my brothers, but what would probably be was seen as his mother and his father. His father looks at Joseph and says, "Come on, son. Really? You know, we don't really know Joseph's attitude in this. It tells us that his brothers were jealous of him. And you can see why. He had his father's love. He had privilege. He had now this line of vision from God that would seem to be making him someone special. They're jealous. But it doesn't seem to me that Joseph is very good at dispelling that jealousy, or maybe even recognizing it. The way that he goes to his brothers, you would think after the first time he might keep his dreams to himself, right? He might not say anything about them. But yet Joseph's like, no, let me tell you this other one that I had. I mean, his brothers aren't even talking to him. They hate him. And Joseph doesn't even seem to realize it. But is that probably too big a thing to consider, since you consider how, well, my brothers aren't doing these things, right? He's the one that gets the coat of many colors. If you look further down in Genesis chapter 37:14, we see that Joseph is sent out to his brothers to find out about them. It almost seems like even from the beginning, Joseph has kind of been his reporter, his spy. Go tell me that the father wants to know where his sons are and everything like that. But imagine the position that puts Joseph in, this youngest brother coming up and saying, "Now, what are y'all doing? Are y'all keeping busy? Because if you're not, I'm going to go back and report it, give my bad report to the father." I mean, that's just asking for trouble. I don't think Joseph in any sense is a bad person here, but maybe he's a little bit unaware, naive. We see that later in some of Joseph's dealings with Potiphar's wife and everything. He may not have been the most aware young man. But it's not maybe his fault, because it was his father's doing. I mean, think about Israel's responses. When he comes and brings in the bad report, what does he do? Well, he listens to Joseph. And he continues to use Joseph, right, later, to go and find out what his brothers are doing. Father should have said, "Wait a minute, I appreciate you telling me, Joseph, but I don't think you want to do that. I think it's going to get you in trouble with your brothers." I mean, he doesn't do him any favors when he singles him out, right? Here's the coat of many colors. Here's this physical garment that you will wear that shows your brothers that I think you're better than them. That its very nature would be one that says, "Y'all go out and work in the field. Joseph, he's my number one hand. He's the one that'll stay home." You see him at least with the dream. He does at least rebuke him a little bit and says, "Now, don't you really think that's going to happen?" But notice it says his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept these sayings in mind. His brothers are turning irate, but for Jacob, for Israel, there's a part of him going, I wonder when that's going to be. You see, he doesn't ever really see what damage he may be doing. You can be right about something and you can still be wrong, right? You may be right, but you can still be a jerk about it. Joseph's situation, the whole thing that's going to play out as we talk about, really comes about. We see him treat his other sons completely different than how he'll treat Jacob and Benjamin. we'll see him that he will almost not give any treatment, preferential treatment to his other sons, and almost be absurdly to those of his favorites. And he really doesn't do Joseph much help. He's not really giving him the social training that he needs. You know, as parents, we have a responsibility to train our children in various ways. Train our children spiritually and morally. To train them, you know, just in knowledge and wisdom. But also, we train them how to have a relationship with God and a relationship with other people. You know, you think about Jesus as a young boy, it tells us that he grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and men. Jacob really let down Joseph, I think, in that favor with men. He didn't give him that social understanding to know how his words would hurt his brothers, how it could put him in a really dangerous situation, because that's what we see happening, how this all ends up in Genesis chapter 37, verse 18. Now here, once again, Joseph is sent out to go find out what his brothers are doing. And it takes him a little bit of time, because the place they were going, they decided wasn't good enough, so they moved to another place. And so by the time Joseph finds them, they see him coming. In verse 18 it says, when they saw him from a distance, before he came close to them, they plotted against him and put him to death. They just have to see him walking down the road, and they're ready to kill him. That's upset. That's frustration. That's anger. I mean, it's not as if he's come up and even said anything to them. They just see him coming, and they just know, oh, what's he coming for? He's going to get us in trouble? Is he going to come brag about his dreams? Is he going to come show off his new garment? They're so angry with him that they are literally thinking about killing him, right? But I mean, they're sitting here thinking about how to kill him, and they're thinking about how to do it, right? Look at verse 20. They're like, okay, what we do is we kill him, and then we use his blood, we throw him in one of the pits, and we say a wild beast devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams, right? You know you're mad when you start making plans. For him, the oldest son, Reuben, has some sense about this. And he convinces them just to throw him into the pit, just to not take his life. But I want you to notice something. Reuben doesn't say, look, let's stop this talk. Reuben just says, okay, we can't kill him. And he thinks to himself, verse 22, I will maybe get him out later, restore him to his father. Reuben is the oldest, right? He's trying to sit here and think, okay, this is too much. But yet, he's not at all have a problem with mistreating him, right? Well, Reuben saved to get rid of him. In verse 25, it says, when they sat down to eat a meal, as they raised their eyes and looked up, a caravan of Ishmaelites were coming from Gilead, with camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what profit is us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh, and his brothers listen to him. Judah says, okay, it'd be wrong to kill him. But we've got a chance to get rid of him. We don't have to put up with him anymore. We can sell him off. It's interesting because later in this story, when the brothers are all reunited and they're in Egypt and they don't recognize Joseph, Reuben and Judah are the ones who seem to have all the negotiations between their father and between Joseph, who they don't know, they don't recognize, but they just see him as the leader in Egypt. They kind of take on these roles, but later it's kind of like they're burdened with them again. For them to be able to take Benjamin, he has to say, well, I'll give up my son if you let me take him. They're the ones that kind of save him, but then they're the ones that get the extra burden of it. But I want you to see here what's happening. That favoritism against their own. Look at what happens at the result. In Genesis 37, verse 34, when they come back to Jacob, they go with their first story. A wild beast killed him. And so it says that Jacob tore his clothes and put on sackcloth on his loins and mourned his son for many days. Then I was grave and mourning for my son. And so his father wept for him. Look at Jacob. He's devastated. His other kids come to him. They try to comfort him. He's like, no, it's no good. I've lost the only one that matters. I'll go to my grave mourning for him. Even after they get rid of Joseph, they don't get to escape him. He's still playing favorites. We know that this story, this event, turns out for the good of all involved. Joseph's travels take him to Egypt, where he becomes the second in command and will change the course of its future. It'll change the course of the future for Israel, because now they will come down to Egypt, and because Joseph is there, they'll be welcomed in, and they will survive and thrive and become a great nation. And Joseph himself will say to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. But I really tonight want to just look at how this came about. God can take our mistakes and do something with them. But that doesn't mean that we should make mistakes. The way Joseph shows partiality with his sons is a mistake, because it splits their relationship. It causes them to do terrible things to their brother. It brings pain and suffering to everyone involved. As we look at Israel, the nation, the man, the people, we said we look at what we don't want to be at sometimes. And this is a great example. Favoritism. Partiality. Two different property is not good. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 21 tells us to do nothing in a spirit of partiality. Don't play favorites. Don't treat people differently. Give one preference over another. It's play favorites. We might think that he does. Now, God does make choices. God gives certain things and acts in certain ways, but the Bible clearly teaches us that God shows no partiality. In other words, God just doesn't look and say, well, God judges fairly and equally. And he wants his people to behave the same way. Turn to James chapter 2. James chapter 2 and verses 1 through 9, James speaks to the early church there and says in verse 1, my brethren, do not hold your faith in our Lord Jesus Christ with an attitude of personal favoritism. That word there that they translate here is personal favoritism. Same word that's translated in Timothy as partiality. The exact same word. It's this idea of preferential treatment to someone because there's something we like about them, because we want to give them a benefit. Of course, in this passage, we see him referencing the idea of it by wealth. In verse 2, he says, for if a man comes into your assembly with a gold ring and dressed in fine clothes, there also comes in a poor man in dirty clothes. You pay special attention to the one who is wearing fine clothes and say, you sit here in a good place. You say to the poor man, you stand over there, or sit down by my footstool. You see, for them, it was easy to show favorites to the rich man. Ooh, this guy's got money. He looks nice. He smells nice. He's a fine, upstanding individual. Boy, we're going to shake his hand and tell him to sit on our pew and pat him on the back. But this other fellow walks in and he's not near as impressive. And we put up with him. We tell him, we don't move over in the pew. We let him sit a couple feet away. It's a division between rich and poor. Maybe we do it between the local and the stranger. You know, sometimes you see that people show favoritism, partiality, right? He's from around here, we like him. He's not from around here, well, we don't like him much. He's from off. He's not from here. Maybe we do it by family. Well, they're kin. He's not. They're part of my extended people that I like them, but I don't like them so much because they're not. Maybe we do it based on color of skin or background. We think of one people immediately and give them a benefit of the doubt and a pass, and another, well, we're as quick to jump on and condemn as anyone else. Partiality, favoritism, whatever way it shows itself, the Scriptures condemn it. And that's what James is condemning the earth, and become judges with evil motives. You see, here's why it's such a problem, especially for the church. Because when we play favorites, when we show partiality, we become the judges. We think we're in the know. Well, that person will listen to the gospel. Oh, they never will. Do we know? Would we have picked somebody like Paul? Would we have thought he would have been a good convert? Probably not. God saw what he could be. But when we make distinctions among ourselves, we become judges with evil motives. Most of the time when we judge someone else, when we show partiality, what we're really showing is our own biases, our own misunderstandings. Jacob was so kind to Joseph, he thought, well, I just like him so much. But he didn't realize what doing that did to other people. Think about when Peter, later on when Peter was with the Gentile Christians, he was the one who had gone and brought them in the first place. You know Peter meant a lot to those Gentile Christians. But when people come from back home, when they say those men that come from James, those men that came from back in Jerusalem, when they come, Peter just starts to pull himself away. Well, I don't want to be seen with him anymore, right? What does that do to those new Christians? They feel rejected. What have we done wrong? Nothing. But Peter, in that action, had caused them harm. Probably didn't mean to. But it's that subtle creep when we begin to make those judgments. Look at verse 5. Listen, my beloved brethren, did God not choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? Do they not blaspheme your fair name by which you have been called? To impress is the one who, well, he's the one that just does anything to you. Yet God has shown he doesn't care much about that distinction, but yet you seem to. He has chosen the poor to receive the kingdom like anyone else, but yet you seem to want to make them second-class citizens. What you really do is what's not important. We do it all kinds of different ways. I think one of the ones I notice a lot in our world today is how we chase celebrity. Somebody that's famous, boy, we want to be connected to them, right? Oh man, yeah, they're famous. We let them do anything. You fulfill the royal law according to the Scripture. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. Favoritism is not love. Jacob was son by making him the favorite, right? He thought he was loving him, but a lot of times the way we think we're showing a lot of love to somebody may not necessarily be the case. Your parent thinks, I really love my kid. I want them to have everything and experience everything, but we might be spoiling them. and we might be setting them up for a miserable life. We let them get away with everything. We don't teach them the discipline that they. However, if we feel that royal law, we love our neighbor as ourselves, then we're doing what's right. That royal law, love your neighbor as yourself, how did Jesus describe it? When the man asked him, who's my neighbor? He pointed out the Samaritan who helped a man who just needed it. But he says in verse 9, if you show partiality, you are committing sin and convicted by the law as transgressors. Can it be any more clear? If you show partiality, you are committing sin. Scriptures teach that. Don't do it. If God doesn't show favoritism, why should we? If God doesn't show partiality, why should we? Just because someone is different than us doesn't mean we can sit there and say, well, I don't have to show love or concern or compassion for them. Just because somebody doesn't think the way that I do or have the same things that I have, doesn't have things that I want. That's really what the rich man, right? They want to be like, well, we want to follow him. James is very clear, as he often is, don't do it. And the story of Israel and his 12 sons and their treatment of Joseph tells us why. Because it only creates animosity. It only creates hate. It only brings up more problems and misery. That's why we need to be very careful in the way that we think and treat other people. Because we show our love of God by the way that we love our neighbor. That's why those two commandments are linked. Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. John would say, how can we say we love God and hate our brother? If we treat others with disrespect, then how can we walk before God and expect to treat him any better? That's why James is so quick to point out the church that has an attitude of personal favoritism. That's why the scriptures are so quick to teach us not to do anything with the spirit of partiality, because it's not the way God wants us to behave. See, the one thing that makes us all truly equal is how we stand before God. No matter how much money I have or don't have, no matter what continent I was born on, no matter my politics or my gender or all these things that we divide ourselves over, we are all people. And God doesn't much care about those things as much as he cares about our faith in his Son. So tonight I ask you the question, are you in the right relationship with God? You see, God wants all men to be saved, but God also knows that there are many that go to destruction. The difference won't be because God didn't love us, but because we didn't listen to him. Now to ask you, are you right with God? Have you done the things that are required to be part of his family?